have one more fabulous speaker, and then me. But we also will have the final ceremony as well. So it's my great pleasure to, and just for those of you planning, we should be able to end half an hour earlier at 4 o'clock. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce my very good friend and colleague, Roger Martin. Roger is the Dean of the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. And he has such a distinguished background, I'm going to actually take a second on it. Going back, Roger was a director of Monitor Corporation and was co-head of the firm for 2 years. And for 13 years, he was a director. Some of you will know him most for his work on integrative thinking. It was a concept really he pioneered. Business design, corporate social responsibility, and also country competitiveness. He writes extensively and has appeared in the Washington Post, Financial Times, Harvard Business Review. He's actually written 12 HBR articles. And he's also the author of a whole number of very important books. Fixing the Game, which was HBR, The Design of Business, HBS Press, The Opposable Mind, which is a wonderful book, Responsibility Virus as well. And Roger's on a bunch of boards, and he's really been responsible for taking the Rotman School at the University of Toronto from being a lesser tier school to one of the most important business schools in the world. So please join me in welcoming Roger Martin.
Well, thank you, Don, for the introduction. Thank you for still being here. I know this has been a long conference. I gather it's been a good one. You heard from Clay Shirky the first day. It was great. I think it's terrific. Great friend. Terrific speaker. Lots of terrific speakers. But I can't help but wondering if it's not a little bit. There's an American cartoonist who I really like, Gary Larson, Far Side, and my son used to have a T-shirt of one of his cartoons, which was a student saying, "Stop, teacher! My head is full. It'll explode now." And you might be at that stage now. So if your heads are full, I will try to keep this simple. Just a couple of things that are pieces of advice that I'd have on spurring more innovation. Now, innovation, right, is a topic that's near and dear to the hearts of many people these days, and it's something in our country, in Canada, and others. There will be innovation policies, and why don't we get enough innovation, and companies not feeling like they have enough innovation. And I often ask in audiences like this, to what extent would you describe yourself as very satisfied with the level and pace of innovation in your organization? How many people would say that? I am very satisfied with the level and pace of innovation that my organization is achieving. So who would say they're very satisfied? Yeah. So this is the usual response, right? Which is, I've had the highest is about 5% and the lowest is nobody. So I actually had a conference of 900 or so people, and the answer was nobody was satisfied with the pace and level of innovation. We had at least one hand that I saw, so we're somewhere in the target range. And so you might ask the question, well, what's that all about? Is it that all these organizations aren't trying? You know, they say they want innovation, but they aren't putting any effort into it, any money into it, any resources, any people. And I've studied that question, and the answer I'm pretty much convinced of is, no, that's not the problem. They are spending time, they are spending resources, money, people. They have huge innovation task forces and huge sets of projects that they're working on that is trying to bring innovation. But if you ask them, right, if they're satisfied, they say, well, no, they're not very satisfied at all. And so the easiest answer, which is they're just sort of not taking it seriously, is not the answer. What I've come to believe the answer is there's something about our modern way of doing business, operating organizations, that inadvertently has gotten in the way of us innovating. And what is that? It is that we have gotten much more, interestingly for this audience, scientific. Now, science has been good for us. Science continues to be good for us. We've created a bunch of new things. But it turns out that in the management of organizations, we've applied science to the management of organizations in ways that unrealizingly, sort of inadvertently, we are not trying to do this, that have crowded out innovation. So I want to dig a little into that. And to be able to do that, we need to understand kind of two fundamental modes of thinking and desired outcomes in the world. So one form of thinking is analytical thinking. Right? This is the use of inductive and deductive logic to declare propositions to be true or false. This is the very core and heart of the scientific revolution and all the science that's come since it. So we prove things now. We prove them either through deductive logic. We have a set of rules that have been handed down, and we apply the rules to a specific situation and say, is the following true or false? Right? Or we do it inductively. We say, we have done a survey of 1,000 instances or 1,000 people, and we've come up with the following answer, and so we can say, this proposition is true. We have proven it. Right? This is the very heart of science. Right? And it's arguable that in the world of the management of organizations, both public sector organizations, for-profit, non-for-profit organizations, that the scientific method of management has, with each passing year, become more important. So for those of you who might be as old as me, who can think back to a time when if you have gone into a boardroom to make a presentation about something and said, well, we're sure this is the case, and the R squared of this relationship is 0.8, so we're really sure. That would have happened 30 years ago at the start of my career, and if I had done that as a little young strategy consultant, I would have gotten heaved out of most boardrooms who have said, what is all of this geeky stuff? We don't make decisions that way. Now, I would argue it's almost impossible to get a decision approved in a boardroom unless you give them the R squared, unless you prove scientifically that what you're saying is true. Why? Because we believe in science. Now, what does that get us? What does analytical thinking get us? Well, it turns out what it gets us is reliability. You analyze the past, you regress the past to produce a reliable, consistent outcome. Right? And it is most reliable and consistent to the extent that the future looks what? A lot like the past. Because if you've regressed the past to prove that something is the case, right, as long as the future kind of looks like the past, you'll get a reliable, consistent outcome. Now, the way you get the most reliable, consistent outcomes to analysis is you make sure that you're only analyzing quantifiable things, and you're analyzing them in a way that avoids any form of bias or judgment whatsoever. That will get you the highest level of reliability. So an example, one of the favorite tools used in the world is the Stanford-Binet IQ test. It's beloved. It's been around for almost 100 years, and it's very beloved and used widely. Why? Because it's almost unnaturally reliable. If you take the Stanford-Binet IQ test 10 times in your life, when you're an 8-year-old, when you're a 15-year-old, when you're a 25-year-old, 50-year-old, you'll get the same score. Independent of your level of education, independent of how old you are, you get virtually the same score. Folks like that because that's a highly reliable test. So we might ask, how on earth did Dr. Turner, who created the test, how did he get it to be so bloody reliable? That's pretty amazing. Answer is he took this concept of intelligence and said, well, that's a little bit vague, right? What is intelligence anyway? So here's my idea. Why don't we define it as your ability to solve little logical puzzles? And for each of those little logical puzzles, there are 5 potential answers, one of which is right, and the other of which are 4 are wrong. And so when you answer those and scribble down your answer or fill in, check the box, we don't have to make any judgment as to whether you're right or wrong. It's obvious. It's clear. We can do it without judgment, out bias. And that gets us an incredibly reliable result. What do you think the problem is with the Stanford-Binet IQ test? What would you want it to do? I mean, I know it does something, right? It spits out a number that says you're a 100 if you're totally average. It's a 125 if you're pretty darn smart. 150, you're Mensa. You get to go to clubs and talk to other people who are equally as smart as you are, if that's what you like to do. What's the problem, do you think? Doesn't tell you much about anything about the rest of your life. So we now know, we've seen it for long enough, that if we try to correlate anything about your life, how well you do in school, how well you do after school, how well you do in life, how happy or sad you are, how much money you make, any of those things, the Stanford-Binet IQ test only can be correlated with 30% of outcomes, i.e. the other 70% of everything that happens to you in life has nothing to do with your intelligence as measured by the Stanford-Binet IQ test. So, is that what we would want out of a test? No, it's not very valid, which is the opposite concept to reliability. On one hand, you've got reliability, the production of a consistent, replicable outcome, and on the other hand, you have validity, the production of an outcome you would actually want to have. So you'd actually, really, if you're trying to measure somebody's IQ, you'd want to have some prediction about how good they're going to be at things, how successful they're going to be, right? That would be a valid outcome. It's just like political polls. We're in the midst of a fun, interesting, as always entertaining American election campaign. And what do the political polls tell you? This poll is right, what? 19 out of 20 times within 4% percentage points, right? Is that actually what we want? Is that what we want to know? What do we want to know? Who's going to win? Now, what's the interesting thing about when we find out that question? Answer to that question. Day after the election, right? Which is one of the generalizable things about validity. Validity can only be proven by the passage of time and future events. Reliability can be buttressed by the regression of past events. So you can prove something analytically with inductive or deductive logic by regressing the past. But the interesting thing, of course, is the only thing you can prove anything about is what? Stuff that we already know. In fact, a cool but bizarre turn of the 20th century American pragmatist philosopher who is a colleague of, or a contemporary of, not a colleague, it wasn't a colleague of anybody, a contemporary of William James and John Dewey, Charles Sanders Peirce, made the assertion, no new idea in the history of humankind has been proven in advance analytically. Think about that for a minute. No new idea in the history of mankind has ever been proven in advance using essentially scientific means. Validity is only proven by the passage of time. So, if we're in a world where we are getting more scientific in our management of organizations with every passing day, when we put a bunch of innovation projects out there and spend a lot of time and effort on these innovation projects, and then what do we put in their path in most organizations? A stage gate process, right? Do we recognize this? Stage gate process, right? We have these 40 innovation projects, and they all come up with their ideas, and they come forward, and then we whittle them down. How do you think we whittle them down generally in most organizations? We analyze them. We ask them if they could please prove that this is a good idea. Right? And we get them to crunch the numbers, analyze them. Guess what happens? Guess what happens? The proof of these new ideas is very, very shoddy. We declare it to be very sloppy work. The work of dreamers, the work of people who are like not being terribly rigorous. And in this modern world, we better darn well be rigorous, because that is what being scientific is, and being scientific is just plain good. Being anything but scientific is bad. And so what typically happens is a whole bunch of the ideas where the proof seems the most shoddy get dumped. The rest of them get sent back to generate still more proof that their idea is an idea worth doing. And then the CEO goes to the board and says, well, you know, we're working on a lot of innovation, but we don't really have anything yet for you, but we're working really hard on it, and we're going to come back to the board next time with some really kind of solid numbers on these ideas. So I would put it to you that that is a core reason why there's way less innovation than we would ever want to expect, given the amount of work on innovation that happens. There are extraordinarily well-meaning executives throughout organizations, throughout this world, who are daily killing innovation with 2 words. 2 words. That's all it takes. Prove and it. Right? It is a really useful word. You could use it in many sentences and everything, so I'm not discouraging the use of it, because life would be much harder, in English at least, to not use it ever. But just don't put prove right before it if you actually want to have innovation. If you actually want to have innovation, just if you expunge that from your vocabulary, you never ask anybody to prove it. Now, if they're doing something that's just honing and refining what you're doing now, I'd get them to prove it. If you're saying, here's how we can cut 2 cents out of the cost of our hamburger, that's fine. They can regress and come with the proof, and that's great. And then they'll do it again, and then they'll do it again, and they'll do it again, and they'll do it again until such time as nobody comes to your store buying hamburgers anymore. But then you actually will need innovation to do something new. That's kind of how the world works. But if you just, for anybody who comes with a new idea, if you actually ban the 2 words prove and it used together in that order, you will have dramatically more innovation. Why? Just because you've decided not to make it impossible to convince yourself of doing something. Now, this is all important. So the other kind of thinking, right, that's opposite to analytical thinking is intuitive thinking, right? Knowing without reasoning, right? And intuitive thinking is oriented most towards creating validity. And who engages in intuitive thinking? Artists. Right? Designers spend more of their time thinking intuitively, and they use a different language system. They'll say, oh, wow, this is going to be great. We just have to do it, and it'll be fantastic. And then what do business people generally say to them? Thank you. Prove it, yes. And the designers, what do they say? Well, I can't. I just know this is going to be great. So there's these two solitudes that tend to develop between analytical thinking and intuitive thinking. And intuitive thinkers spend their time seeking validity. Analytical thinkers spend their time, typically unrealizingly, seeking reliability. They're encouraged to do so too, especially if they're a publicly traded company in North America. Because think about what does the stock market, what do analysts on Wall Street want more than anything else? Predictability, reliability. In fact, there's now incredibly clear demonstration of this in the numbers. So if you had two publicly traded companies in the United States, or you have one company in two scenarios. Scenario one, they earned $1 last quarter. Analysts think they're going to make $1.15 this quarter, and that's the consensus earnings number, and they make $1.12. Scenario A. Scenario B, same company, $1 last quarter. Analysts think they're going to make 108, and they make 110. Question: which is a more valid outcome from the standpoint of the shareholders? Making $1.12 or $1.10? Which would shareholders prefer? Right? $1.12. It's a more valid outcome. What do the analysts prefer? $1.10, because it's more than they thought, not less than they thought. They want reliability, not validity. And the data now shows, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the stock price of the company in scenario B, making 110, will be higher than the stock price if they make 112, when the expectations were 115. So it's getting to be a harder world for validity to win out over reliability. Now, why is this important? This is important because of the way we figure stuff out on the planet. So the way we figure stuff out on the planet is that everything we know now, every last thing we know now, started out a mystery. It was once a mystery why, if I let go of this, it would fall to the ground. There are a whole lot of ideas about it. Animal spirits, God's will, the desire for all items to come close to Mother Earth. There were myriad potential reasons for why, if I let go of this, it would fall. That's how everything starts. Everything also started. How on earth do you take somebody? I'm trying to take a picture, take you, and draw you in 2 dimensions. And I want to make it look like you. That was a mystery. How do we know that is a mystery? We got a whole lot of things that kind of look like that on cave walls and stuff. That's everything. Everything we now know started out a mystery. For some things that started a mystery, we study them enough that out of the mystery comes a heuristic, a way of understanding what was previously a mystery. So a particular apple happened to hit a particularly smart dude on the head at some point in our history, and the guy says, I think there's a universal force, and I'm going to call it gravity. And that universal force pushes everything down. Birds flap their wings, and they can overcome the forces of gravity, but gravity's still pushing them down. And somebody comes along with the view that, you know what? There's this thing called perspective that foreshortens things, and we got to take into account perspective if we're going to make anything on 2 dimensions look like it did in 3 dimensions. We start to learn these things over time. For some things in the world, we think about them long enough and hard enough that they become an algorithm. Rather than a heuristic, which is just a way of thinking about something that gets you more likely to an answer that you would like, a valid answer, an algorithm produces it. So we finally figure out that it isn't animal spirits or the desire of things to be near Mother Earth, it's gravity. And if I drop this anywhere but America, it will drop at 9.8 meters per second squared. Because America is so exceptional, it'll drop at 32 feet per second squared in America. But everywhere else, 9.8 meters per second squared. And we figured out that there's a thing called a vanishing point, that if we take that into account, we can draw anything on a two-dimensional surface and make it look three-dimensional. So this is how all knowledge advances. This is how innovation happens. Taking mysteries, turning them into heuristics, heuristics turning them into algorithms. That's what I call the knowledge funnel. Now, you'd ask the question, like, why? Why do you want to do this? Why would you want to push something through the knowledge funnel? The obvious answer is, it's more efficient. What's the problem with mysteries? The problem with mysteries is they take a long time to deal with, and you're very inefficient in doing so. Why? Because you've got to think about everything. You've got to think about everything about the situation because you don't know what to pay attention to. This is why lots of mystery solving goes on in nonprofit organizations, universities being a prime example. Right? Professors don't tell you exactly when they're going to get done solving a mystery. They just say, we're working away at it, partially because you cannot tell when you will solve the mystery, and you cannot tell how long or hard it's work and how many resources it's going to take to solve a mystery. You just kind of go at it. So as you solve a mystery and turn it into a heuristic, it becomes less expensive. It's more efficient. If you're Procter & Gamble and you figure out from the mystery of what do women age 25 to 49 care, and what factors do they care about in their hair care, their shampoo? If you figure out it's these 5, that's your heuristic, that makes it a lot easier, a lot more likely for you to get a shampoo that they're really going to love and buy lots of. Right? And if you can get something down to an algorithm, right, you become even more efficient. Think McDonald's. Think of those hamburgers. The McDonald's brothers stared into the mystery of how people in 1955 were going to eat in post-World War II, burgeoning freeway, car economy, beach culture in California. They came up with a heuristic, a quick service restaurant. We'll narrow down the menu, get people in and out very quickly, and people will like that. That's consistent with this car and beach culture. The heuristic works. They have one restaurant. It's crowded all the time, so they open another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, until they get to 5 restaurants and are making a ton of money with this heuristic that's a better heuristic than anybody else's. They've solved a mystery, created a heuristic, and created lots and lots of value from that. Then the guy, Ray Kroc, who sold them their 3-at-a-time milkshake makers, which was an innovation, to allow them to do their thing faster, came along and said, I would like to buy your little chain. And he paid them a princely sum of some $15 million. And what did he do? He turned it into an algorithm. Here's the 57-step process for cooking a hamburger. Here's our site selection algorithm. Here's our supply chain algorithm. He made algorithms out of everything that McDonald's did, which enabled McDonald's to blanket America. It took McDonald's only 10 years after Kroc bought them to blanket America. They've infilled after that, but another 10 years to blanket most of the world. Why? Because of the power of an algorithm, the power of getting knowledge to that point. A couple more things to be cognizant of on this. So one thing is, the general metaphor we use for building knowledge, we say our metaphor about knowledge is we build it over time. In fact, I'd argue we get more knowledgeable as we subtract things. Leaving things out is what makes you knowledgeable. You've figured out what of all the things you could possibly pay attention to, you need to pay attention to and are important in how they work. So knowledge is a subtractive, not an additive process. That's one thing. The other thing is the key, two other things. The other thing is the key is to not stop at the algorithm, right? Because what happened, right? At some point in the 80s, people started to say, maybe, just maybe there's something else I ought to be eating other than pressure-cooked beef, deep-fried potatoes, and sugar and milk stirred together. Maybe I want to live longer, and maybe I'll get one of those Subways that Gerald is eating and getting all thin. Subway stared into another mystery of what does fast food look like in the 80s and 90s, and now is a bigger restaurant chain in terms of number of restaurants, not total sales yet, than McDonald's. So the key is to be able to keep circulating around and around. The other thing to note from the perspective of this audience in particular is that I think, this is I think how knowledge transpired and changed over the course of human endeavors until the middle of the 20th century, when something fundamental changed that changed, I think, a whole lot about knowledge. When we figured out that when you got to a stage of an algorithm, you could take that algorithm and code it into a series of ones and zeros and shove it through a machine we called a computer, it could be run magically consistently and magically quickly. We actually, in the second half of the 20th century, added a step to the historical evolution of knowledge on the face of the planet. And what that did for us, right, is created incredible efficiencies of the sort we've never seen before. So essentially we added a step from why does this fall down, universal force called gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared, to Honeywell being able to land a 777 without any human intervention, and especially in the middle of a snowstorm when the pilots can't see anything. Incredible efficiency and effectiveness from that last step. That is why the wrong way to think about software is as an industry. It's not an industry like any other industry in the world, where there's a sort of a defined demand and you make so much stuff in that industry. The better way to think about software is it's the resting place for all knowledge in the world. Some knowledge never rests. We have no answers to some of the great mysteries of life. Right? Like, what do women really want? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. There are some things that remain a mystery, but all things progress toward algorithm and software. So software is an infinitely sized industry. Software is as big as there is knowledge in the world. That's why if I were whispering in somebody's ears and it's not the 1960s, I wouldn't say plastics. I would say software for sure. How does it relate to my earlier point you might be now asking? The question is, how do you get from mystery to heuristic or heuristic to algorithm? Can you analyze your way there? The answer is no. You cannot analyze your way from a mystery to a heuristic or a heuristic to an algorithm. You can hone and refine an existing heuristic using analysis. You can hone and refine an existing algorithm using analysis, but you can't make the jump. And that is why I think the key to success in the 21st century, the innovation century, is being able to combine the best of analytical thinking with the best of intuitive thinking, the search for reliability with the search for validity. Right? If you don't do that combination, what happens is that you just get doomed to stay in the mystery or doomed to stay in the heuristic that you're currently operating under. Right? Right? See, and even going from a heuristic to an algorithm, right? Dan Brickman could not prove in advance that people would love VisiCalc. Right? But he had an idea. He said, you know what? There is something very consistent about all spreadsheets. They have rows and columns, and things tend to be some sort of formula from something else in this. And if I created a hunk of software that did that, I'd be turning the heuristic of building a spreadsheet into the algorithm of building a spreadsheet powered by software. That takes a creative leap of the mind. And that's what Charles Sanders Peirce said, the intuitive thinking, right, on the right side here was. He called it a logical leap of the mind, or an inference to the best explanation. Something that you cannot prove, and it is not a direct extension of your analysis of the past. It's a logical leap of the mind. It's still logic, but it's a logical leap. And to do that, an organization, right, has to recognize that if we want to make those advances of the sort we call innovation, taking a mystery and turning it into a heuristic, taking a heuristic and turning it into an algorithm, if we want that, we can't ask our people who are doing it to prove it with analysis. That will simply make it not happen. I will make just one more thought, and that is the other thing that I think gets in the way of innovation in the world, and that is I think there's a massive confusion in the world between invention and innovation. And I would beat up my own country on here. Our country thinks we have an innovation policy. We don't. We have an invention policy. I wish we had an innovation policy. It would be awesome if we did, but we don't. What is invention? Invention, I would argue, is the creation of a new-to-the-world idea, product, service, whatever. It's driven by curiosity or research interest of the researcher. They say, I think this would be cool to figure out, and they go about trying to do that. Excuse me. Uniqueness defines merit, and scientific skills drive success, if not are almost the entire story. And anybody who lives in this country could recognize that our governments spur massive amounts of that. Fund scientific research at national research labs. They fund scientific research, curiosity-based research in universities. They do a whole bunch of that. And then the idea is, after all of that happens, you commercialize it. And not much of that happens, and we're all like baffled why. Why doesn't that happen? Well, it's because that's not basically how much innovation ever happens. So we shouldn't be surprised. I think our commercialization record in Canada is excellent. We get about as much commercialization as you'd ever expect out of the methodology we use, which is to have a bunch of invention and hope some of it is commercializable. Innovation is creating new value for customers. And it's driven primarily by the desire to add customer value. And profitably serving customers is what defines merit. And there's a whole bunch of skills that are required for that. And I think we'll keep on getting lots and lots of invention in the world and not nearly as much innovation in the world as long as we treat the two as the same and call invention activities innovation activities. And one of the things I absolutely believe in, I just think it's going to be in the century of innovation. And, you know, the last half of the last century was the century, really, of kind of computers and software and the like. And, And if you ask in 1950 how many computer science programs were there, how many computer engineering programs were there as of 1950, I think, I'm not enough of a historian to know, but I think the answer is none, or maybe a few scattered ones. But then we figured out that these computers and everything were really, really, really important. And so now we have produced vast numbers of computer engineers and computer scientists. I know we don't think we produce enough of them, but we produce vast numbers of them because we figured out that was really important. We've now figured out that innovation is important, and we don't train for it. We don't. Check it out, we don't. And I don't know why. It's trainable. Is anybody here from Singapore? No? Singapore? We work in Singapore. The Rotman School of Management works with Singapore on Design Work Singapore, doing innovation training, teaching high school students how to innovate, teaching college students how to innovate, teaching small businesses how to innovate, because Singapore has got perhaps the cleverest economic development policy on the face of the planet. But not many countries do it. And I would make innovation education mandatory for graduation from secondary school in this country. Easy to do, easy to teach them how to understand users, go out and understand users, figure out what they don't have that they would wish they would have, not by asking them, by watching them, teach them how to do ethnographic research in high school, teach them how to, on the basis of that, to brainstorm new ideas, to create prototypes, to try them out, get rapid prototyping and feedback. If we had an entire generation of innovators coming out of high school, and why do I say high school? Because it's got to be everyone. The minute you get to post-secondary education, you lop it down to half the people. If you get to graduate education, you lop it down to 16% if you're Canada, a little more if you're US. High school, we need to teach them how to innovate. Then, when they become research professors at universities, their first inclination will be, before I start trying to figure out something at the bench, I will go out and figure out what a customer would actually want, and then spend my time innovating something incredibly useful, breakthrough for them. And I will not seek to prove in advance that that's what they want. Instead, I will try something, prototype it, work on it, improve it. If we did that, we'd make this an incredible innovation country. Anybody who does that will be catching up to Singapore, but that's nothing new. Those are my thoughts on innovation. I hope they help you. Thank you very much.